Hey, you have Patrick Findaro here, co-founder at Vetted Biz and Visa Franchise. Very excited to have on John Usher, who I've known for the past 5 or so years. Early in our history at Visa Franchise, we were at an Immigration Lawyers Association conference in Orlando. I met John, former franchisee of McDonald's, multiple locations, Moe's Southwestern Grill, franchise attorney, immigration attorney. So really just a ton of overlap for what we do at both Vetted Biz, which is more of a data and media company, as well as Visa Franchise, which acts as a franchise consultant for those that are seeking principally the E2 investor visa. So John, really appreciate you joining today.
Couple of strange guys, huh? With an intersecting interest in franchising and immigration. So
yeah, I mean, there's got to be a few people like us. You're obviously on the legal side, and we're more kind of on the business, financial side. But I've never met another attorney like you that really focuses on the visas and the franchise law aspect.
yeah, it's kind of how life unfolded. If you wanted me to go through my franchise history, it started, I think, about the age of 15 when I found out my parents were going to get a McDonald's franchise. And that was a long time ago in probably early 70s. Started working because I knew eventually we would get our own store and would be working in it. And that happened. And my parents got a franchise and we moved from Florida to Mississippi. And of course, worked in the family business and went to law school. And when I was finishing law school, my father died, and we had to obviously consider what we were going to do at that point. Me being the oldest child, my mother at the time being what I thought was a very old age of her 50s, that I needed to jump into the business and kind of help her. So that's what I did and became a McDonald's franchisee. I was probably 23 or 24 at the time.
Wow. So probably one of the younger franchisees.
Yeah, kind of weird to be the kid on the block, but we managed and added another store in Alabama. And as time goes by, as it does, we saw an opportunity to come to Florida, and we did that, came to Ocala. And something I was going to do for a year or two just to help her out. 25 years goes by. Kind of done with the McDonald's in terms of corporate structure, and felt like I wanted to do something else. We did. We sold the stores. We had about 9 stores at the time we sold in 2000.
When you started at 23, 24, how many stores were you operating?
We had 2 at that time in Mississippi.
Wow, okay.
So kind of thrown in and learned the mechanics of being a franchisee. And certainly over the next 20 years, we built stores, we bought stores, pretty much saw all aspects of the franchise business.
And also, like, what your role as like an owner operator is very different if there's like 1 or 2 stores or 9 stores and you're actually looking to develop more locations and deal with all the real estate components, I imagine.
Yeah, it's a learning experience, and it was certainly good to be exposed to all the different possibilities with business. But it just got to the point, too, that you're always an easy target as a McDonald's franchisee in terms of customers and lawsuits, and then you're dealing with McDonald's, which is certainly very successful, but very corporate business where people are very corporate focused, and just thought it was time to do something different. So we sold those stores. But, one of the things that separates me in terms of legal work with franchising is I've taken the garbage out to the dumpster, and I've dealt with, making sure robberies don't happen. Everything in between. I think we experienced pretty much everything along the way. And so I've got a different perspective than your normal franchise lawyer, I would say.
Well, you know what really goes wrong? What not can go wrong in theory.
Yeah, I think I experienced a lot, I'll put it that way.
My brother started his career at the management training program at Restaurant Brands International. And part of that program, he worked like 8 or 10 weeks at a Burger King. And that definitely was a positive experience for him. And some of his, I guess, classmates or people in his cohort didn't make it, and they didn't advance in the training program just because they couldn't deal with the restaurant operations, and the corporate office did not want them being in the business if they couldn't really work at a Burger King restaurant, which I applaud, and probably more franchisors should do that for their executives.
Yeah, I would agree with you. There's nothing like being in the trenches for sure, and
Yeah,
that's especially true with, I think, prospective franchisees when they're considering a franchise. It involves dealing with the public. When I work with those people that are evaluating their franchise options, I always want to get their background and kind of understand where they're coming from, what their experience is, because my finding is that people who have been in their own business know a lot of the reality of what comes with being in business, the good and bad. Whereas if you come from a government sector, you've got an idea of what's going on with a franchise as you deal with people, but it's only from that one side of the counter, and it is a different animal, and it's not for everybody. So,
and you can go home at 5 or 6 and be kind of totally done and not have to worry about potential issues with your business as the business continues to operate.
exactly.
And for most of the clients that you advise now on the franchising side, are they looking to go into business for the first time and open up a single franchise location, or are they looking to open up multiple locations, kind of like what you did with your career with McDonald's?
Typically, people are looking at one location. If they're thinking more, most of the time I tell them, don't do that. I think there's always an opportunity to grow if something's successful, but don't bite off more than you can chew. So much of the time, as I'm sure you know, people are using their heart more than their head when they're making franchise decisions. And it's easy to get ahead of yourself. But rarely do I think it would be a good idea for somebody to do a multi-unit deal, or I'm not in favor really of market development deals unless you are just more than 100% sure it's going to work, because the incentives just aren't worth the risk.
Yeah, exactly. You said that well. You're the one that's footing the bill, where the corporate office is benefiting quite a lot with the capital that you're putting at work if it's a major area development deal.
Well, even if you're doing one unit, I tell people it's going to be your money and your sweat building out somebody's brand. So doing that for one unit is one thing, but because there's a discount if you do a multi-unit development deal, most of the time that market isn't going to go anywhere. It'll be available if you're doing well and the franchisor is doing what they should be doing, then you're mutually going to move ahead. So, to get a $10,000, $15,000 discount if you sign now for 2 or more is never worth it to me. So,
that's well said. It seems a bit like an agency issue where you have a franchise development guy who's selling, and he's going to get compensated more if he gets someone to commit to 3 territories right away as opposed to just one.
Yeah, we'll look at it from the franchisor's perspective. Any money I have in the bank today, and if you have 2 or 3 years to build out, you've got the time value of that money. If it doesn't work out, you're ahead. And if it does work out and they do build, you're still come out ahead. So that's a win-win for the franchisor as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I've heard a couple examples of franchisors that they had like, say, 10 corporate locations. They started franchising. They awarded 15, 20 licenses. And they gave, like, this one case that comes to mind in the ice cream space, gave a area development for a big metropolitan area. And it was a 10-year contract, and they just didn't do that well. And they're like, shoot, we would have loved to just do this ourselves, or bring in someone that opens one location and then we see that there's a mutual fit, and then they continue opening multiple locations from there.
Yeah, when I occasionally do some work for franchisors, when I'm looking at people that are potentially going to be franchisors, I want to know what their attitude is towards growth. And, there's healthy growth in the franchise business and there's unhealthy growth. And if you aren't doing a good job as you're rolling out a lot of units, what good does that do? You need to have some discipline, I think, as a franchisor, and in terms of how you're developing. And I'm always suspicious if people are growing just wherever. It makes sense to me that you should concentrate on a certain area, build from there. If you're going to be in Nevada, also we're opening in New Jersey and whatever, what kind of support are you going to get? And as well as I do, one of the things that I tell people when they're looking at a franchise is you got to look and really determine if the franchisor is committed to selling a special product or providing a special service, or are they in the business of being a franchisor? Some people they live on the franchise fees and paint a big picture.
That's what I was going to say. The beauty of the franchise disclosure document, what is it, item 21, it's usually in an exhibit. You can usually see the breakdown by what they're getting from the franchise fee line item and then what they're getting from the royalty fee. And it's usually one of the extremes. It's usually 90% royalty, 10% franchise fee, or 90% franchise fee, 10% royalty.
That's what I'm getting at, is what is their real business? Are they just serial sellers, here today, gone later, paint a big picture? I think it's real important for people to recognize that everybody's not starting with the same business goals. So part of the scrutiny.
And then also, looking at the churn rate, because you have some established franchises like a major tool franchise that has just a really high transfer rate. And they're getting that clip every time there's a new franchisee coming in, new fresh blood. They're getting what I believe is like half the franchise fee. But if you're doing 100, 200, 300 transfers a year, that's pretty sizable amount of cash that's going in the franchisor's coffers.
Where are the revenue streams? And, what you're talking about is so important because people get into this business to make money. Franchisees, that's fine. Everybody has financial considerations, but you have to be, or you should be, diligent in knowing the franchisor you're dealing with and these kind of things. And I think the points you're making and that you do in your business is forcing people to look at a little bit of the financials more than they typically do. We always tell them, work with an accountant. You need to do pro formas. You need to understand.
Yes.
You need to understand your exit strategy. It's not just, I'm going to do this tomorrow and make money and I'll figure out the rest of it later. That's kind of a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. So what you're talking about with the information that you provide on the vetted side of things, where you're pointing out what is a value going to be down the road based on the industry or other similar businesses, that's pretty vital information.
What's the resale value? Because if the midpoint investment's $200K and franchises are regularly selling for $400K, okay, that makes sense. But there's a lot of franchises, especially in the food side, where if they're not benefiting greatly from the sale of the real estate component, the business itself sells at a fraction of what the initial investment was. So it's like if you're not making it big on the selling doing the triple net lease market, and there's not some other angle to the business, you have to really question, okay, wait, does this business make sense? Like, I'm opening it for $500K and I can only sell it for $200K. That doesn't add up.
No, I agree with you. And I really urge people to think about their exit strategy before they sign. You should know, are you in it, cash flow? Do you want to have something to sell? Is there passing the business on or not? And I think it's easy for people not to consider the things we're talking about. And it's too bad because once, you've signed the document, you've committed. So
what I've seen, like typical franchise agreement, say 10 years, and you'll know more than me, but the average franchisee does not stay the 10 years. It's more like a 7-year commitment where they're then selling to someone else, closing, or they negotiate with the franchisor and they're running the business as an independent business in the same industry. But you got to plan for what's going to happen Yeah, ideally after that 10 years and everything goes great and you renew the contract, but in practice, it's more like 6, 7, 8 years that there's going to be a pretty significant event and a transition.
I think the grass is always greener on the other side, and there's such a temptation to believe I'm going to be my own boss. Everybody makes money. But the reality is, like you said, that there's a burnout attrition rate for different reasons. But, when you get to that crossroads, the terms are set, and you're going to have to live with whether does a new franchisee pick up the remaining balance of that term, or do they get a new term? Who has to pay? That's going to factor into the sales price. If I've got to pay fees to transfer or pay new franchise fees, but everybody tends to think, I just want to get in business. I want to get in business now. It's all the same. That's okay. And it's really not. You have one opportunity to negotiate some things, and that's before you sign. And the saying is, if you have to look at those documents later, it's probably because there's a problem. I think if people appreciated that fact that, when you sign and you're signing those documents, typically, 200, 300, 400 pages, there's a lot of items in there that are slanted to make sure you're on the hook as a franchisee. Franchisor pays a lot of money to get those documents done. Risk is going to be shifted to the franchisee, and you essentially are saying, I agree to everything that's in here. I'll be bound by. And the unusual thing with franchising is, and it's understandable because franchisors don't know the future and what they need to do. They need to be able to make adjustments. But you're basically saying, I'm agreeing to any changes you want to make along the way in terms of any standards or any shifts in business you want to do. So you're really signing what I call a contract of unknowns. You're taking a big leap with any franchise.
And oftentimes like a personal guarantee. I had a former franchisee on, put his head down, worked 50, 60 hours a week. It just didn't work out. The business wasn't working out on the territory. The franchise model was flawed, and he was trying to rally other franchisees in the network and kind of work through it. But he then got hit with a lawsuit for royalties, unpaid royalties of 18 years. And even if the business went bankrupt, he signed a personal guarantee to that franchise agreement. So he was liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars of royalties for a business that did not make sense and that he gave his best effort. And what I see is just greed from the franchisor side, pushing this guy into essentially a bankruptcy to get as much money as possible.
I would agree with you. And that's one of the things when people say, well, do I need an attorney to look at it or anything? Liquidated damages is a term they should be familiar with. And whether it's present in a franchise agreement or absent tells me something about the mindset of the franchisor. Liquidated damages is basically saying both parties agree that if you as a franchisee breach the contract, we are going to use the following formula to determine what you owe us, meaning those uncollected future phantom sales. And if I see that there's something in there, I certainly always point it out to the prospective franchisee. But I'm much more impressed when it's not in there because it indicates to me they don't have a desire to come after me if this business doesn't work. I've never understood other than it being pure greed. If somebody is in a position where they've lost money, their business has to close, you're going to pile on and try and grab every penny you can. It makes no sense. People go in, they're using good faith.
It's ridiculous.
They're using their efforts, they're using their money, and if it gets to a breaking point, and you and I know it does happen, to have the audacity to kind of seek to inflict more harm, I find that appalling too. And that's part of why my business is focused. My heart is kind of with the prospective franchisees. You don't understand these things, people get whacked, and they're off the rails, and it's a sad situation. So
there's a big information asymmetry, and we're trying to work through that at Vetted Biz for prospective franchisees. But
I agree.
had you known, and if it was easy to understand the lawsuits, not just in the franchise disclosure document, but there's other lawsuits that don't have to be disclosed in that. Mm-hmm. It would be nice to know that the franchisor you're about to sign up with has sued 10 franchisees over the last 5 years and sued them for these reasons. And where a typical person that's leaving a government job, or maybe mid-career executive that's done an amazing job in their industry but has never bought a business before, that's not something that they're going to necessarily be looking at and diving into.
Yeah, I think with what you're saying is certainly true. It's not that hard, though, to look at the litigation that is disclosed and get a sense of the appetite to go after franchisees, or how many franchisees feel like they've been wronged to the point that they have to bring action. And you got to put it against, if a franchisor has 2,000 units, there's going to be some litigation. It happens in our world. But if you see the same kind of allegations, or you see them coming after what we're talking about, uncollected fees and everything, then they're aggressive. And there are some. There's one I'm thinking of that I think files actions that are almost weekly against franchisees. They're
I looked at a fitness concept recently, and it was disclosed, and I guess it's item 3 where they have litigations, and it disclosed like multiple times, like at least 2 times, where they brought a former franchisee into bankruptcy, and that's in the FDD. And the company is making cash flow above $1 million a year, where this guy is going bankrupt, and it's crazy that
it's sick, I think. I mean, that anybody would feel the need to go to that degree to, ruin somebody for what? I mean, they don't really need that money. It's not because they did anything wrong. They probably just ended up in a bad situation that they couldn't get out of. So that's not a time to kick somebody. I think we both agree with that. And that's
also got to look in the mirror. Like a lot of these systems, it's just the model's not that good, and they failed not because of the location nor the operator, but it's just a flawed business model.
I totally agree with you. It's not necessarily some individual did something wrong. It's just it wasn't going to work no matter what. And you and I share these same philosophies, and I think that's kind of why we do what we do, is be smart, have your eyes open, consider these things, do it now. I'm amazed. I sometimes tell people, if you buy a house, you'll get a home inspection. You'll spend the equivalent of an amount of money on a franchise just because you believe the ice cream really tastes good.
Pay the inspector, pay the franchise attorney and the accountant to do a proper inspection.
Yeah, I mean, I try to point out things where they may have an opportunity to save some money, so it offsets my fee. If you deal with somebody and you can say, talk to them about the transfer fee. You can do something where they'll give for an event that's not going to happen for 10 years. They may agree to it. Well, you get your money back then is what I hope.
Yeah, and it could happen in 3 years. It could happen in 5 years. It could, happen a lot longer, but that could be significant, 10K, 15K of savings there.
That's what I mean. It all depends, of course, on the franchisor. Like I do, it's that teeter-totter of who wants who more, how much are they willing to negotiate. It's certainly going to vary, but you shouldn't miss the opportunity to potentially do yourself some good. So understand the franchise document, understand the commitment you're making, understand how the risks are shifted to you, and try and structure things that may save you a little money potentially. I just think way too many people don't go in with the proper mindset and as much knowledge as they need, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm actually in the process of writing a book. I haven't told you this, John, but I'm writing a book on franchising and basically how to buy a franchise, how to acquire an existing franchise. And the only advisor that's really required, in my view, is the franchise attorney. And if it's a retail location, a real estate attorney to review what you're signing the lease for.
I think so. And I also always check with people to see if they have an accountant, if they've got somebody capable, or if they're capable, they can do the kind of things you're talking about. Look at the numbers, do the analysis. Yes. You should certainly do your pro forma. You should know that. But there are other financial.
Any business needs a pro forma. And we've seen sometimes the financing specialist, if they're, depending on the firm, can do a pretty good job with the pro forma, but just have to make sure that the interests are aligned and they're not like overstating the numbers just to get like the SBA loan approved or just to get the loan across the finish line.
Right. I think one of the things I do also is point out to people the value you have as a franchisee to the franchisor. Take the fees that you will pay them over, say, 10 years. And I do that calculation sometimes with people. You're bringing in that much money to them. And when you do it over 10 years, it's pretty significant. So you need to appreciate your own worth and what you're bringing in. I think that gets underestimated. And that's true of everything, because when they have a $52 a month software fee and $112 whatever this and 78 for that, there's a tendency to gloss over those things. But you're looking at, whatever, $300 a month, and they have the right to increase that. You don't realize that $300 until $300 is important to you.
Exactly. Or the next economic cycle takes a downturn and you're like, I need to reduce all my costs. Oh shit, I can't reduce this one because I'm contractually obliged to pay this fee.
I looked at one restaurant and I think they were collecting, I think it was more than 70% of the revenue that came in, they were nicking one way or the other, meaning they were supplying goods. So they're going to take the supply chain. Then the software, they own the software. You're paying a fee on that. There were other elements in it where if they could take a portion, they did. And so it doesn't end up I'm paying them 6% or 7%. The real number, I think, was in the 20s. So
I've seen some commercial cleaning franchises where it's like up to 20, 25%. And it could be worth it depending on what the franchisor is doing. If the franchisor does all the marketing, all the sales, and all you've got to do is serve the client and find employees, okay, you could pay a lot to not have to worry about any sales for like a service-based franchise. But if you still have to do all that, then you have to really question, okay, is this worth it? And over a 10-year period, they're making $300K. I don't see how that much value. I would not pay someone $30K a month for what they're providing me. $30K a year, I should say.
A lot of this, there may not be a right or wrong per se. It all depends on the situation like you're talking about. So I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but it has to be looked at in light of the particular business you're in and what they're bringing in to the table. And then you look at things like indemnification, where if they're supplying all the software and doing everything, but they'll typically say, you need to indemnify us for any action. So if there's a software privacy breach, credit card stuff, you have to use their system and do things their way. But if there's an issue and they get sued, you're to defend. Indemnification can be fair in some situations and others not. But that's an easy one that I think most people gloss over. Is that provision?
Yeah, and all these things for a few $1,000s on the front end. I mean, you can save what could be maybe over $100,000 if you go into litigation. And I haven't gone through all the records and done a study, but from just my own research going through these FDDs, it usually looks like the franchisor wins. So you're not going to get those attorney fees back and it's going to cost a lot of time and money if it does go to litigation.
Totally accurate. The deck is stacked against the franchisee. That's all. That's the franchise disclosure documents. They comply with the federal law by providing FDD, and it's supposed to be in plain English. But most people, when you get a 300-page document, tend to start drifting off. And so yes, they're complying because they tell you stuff, and they do. I see it all the time where it's, we can do this, we can do that. You will do that. We can do this. People go ahead and sign, and then sometimes they put in those questionnaires. Have you read and reviewed? Do you understand all the terms? That's another gotcha. The whole thing with the document basically is shifting risk, like I said, and making it where it's going to be extremely difficult for anybody to prevail against the franchisor litigation. There's the practical concerns of how much it costs. Then you have things now where they're trying to prevent any class actions. So you can't join together in theory to sue the franchisor. Well, it is a stacked deck, and that's part of why I tell people they're paying franchise attorneys a lot of money to do those documents, and everything in there is in there for a reason. And it's not your benefit. Okay. It's gonna, if it needs interpretation or enforcement.
The funny thing, it was like the FTC franchise rule was created to benefit the consumer, but it seems like at the end of the day, they disclose everything and add in so much legal language that it would be worse than if it was just a eight-page document that had a lot less information in there at the end of the day.
I haven't thought of that, but that's really interesting. And you might be right that if you had to do a simple form and check some boxes or something, it'd probably do a better service for people because, the way attorneys are, they're gonna manipulate, push, do whatever to their advantage. And if the rules say you got to disclose in plain English and we want to know this stuff, they say, okay, by God, I'll give it to you. Here it is. And
licensing agreements aren't that long. Like I looked at the Starbucks licensing agreement. I think it's like 20 or 30 pages. So say you own a hotel and you want to add in a Starbucks cart to the lobby or a little Starbucks in the lobby space. 30-page agreement. And there's pros and cons to everything in life. I mean, at Vetted Biz, obviously, we love all the data that's published in the FDD and required. But there's definitely some serious cons on the consumer side.
Yeah, I saw a franchise agreement in the United Kingdom a little while ago, and I was shocked by 34 pages or something. It's become a beast here. It's just grown its own life because it helps the franchisors. Franchisors have the money. They're gonna. That trend's not going to reverse. When they issue new FDDs, that's because there's been litigation or there's some breach in the system that needs to be shored up. It's very much a stacked deck, and it doesn't mean that franchises are bad or it can't be successful. I don't want to seem like everything is wrong and everything. Obviously, it does work for a lot of people, but the general public, I don't think, appreciates or sees when it doesn't work. And that's kind of, I think, I want them to go in eyes open. I think that's the nature of your business too. You want people to understand what's going on. And without help, I don't think people can do it.
Yeah, it's like there's just way too much information where if you haven't already done it yourself and you haven't already owned franchises, there's a big information disadvantage where you're just going to miss too many things.
And some of it is like I told somebody earlier this week, and they had read through the documents and I gave them credit for that and they asked good questions. But then you point out something like liquidated damages. And there's an example of something that if it's not put in the agreement, that tells me something. So it's not always reading the document. It may be what's not there. And people aren't going to know or appreciate or think that way. That's just,
unless you have the experience of going through hundreds of FTDs advising clients on that. Wrapping up today's conversation, if there was like a single data point or a single item that a prospective franchisee should focus on, or at least check the box on, what would that item be? What would that data point be? Potential red flag or even positive point, green flag, that the franchise is worth exploring further?
I don't really think there is a single thing. I think it's a matter of doing proper due diligence, which consists of more than just contacting some franchisees or eating some of the food and liking the food. I think what you're talking about with the financial analysis is greatly underappreciated. And I think what you're pointing out in terms of how our franchise is doing within their industry, what's the potential, what am I going to sell it for? You have to have a game plan all the way through. And when you're raising that question with people by saying, here's what you can expect to get out of this business based on industry averages. I like that. I just tell people you got to have an exit strategy, and are you building to that? And what do you have? Who are you going to sell to when the time comes? And that's part of it. If it's a small franchise brand, there's going to be limited interest. Well, you don't get top dollar with limited interest. I think there's no single thing or even a couple of things that I can think of, Patrick. I think it's just you got to.
Well, I think you said it right there. There's an exit strategy and all these factors that go into it, that you have to have an exit strategy because you're probably going to only hold on to that asset for 6, 7, or 8 years. So you better be damn sure that you know what you're signing up for.
I think that's a good summary. And I think most of the people are a little bit thrown when I say, what's plan B? What's your exit? What's your purpose in doing this business? And you get some, well, we want to make money. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, like I say, you buy a house, you're cautious, they require inspections, and you want to know what's hidden. I'm always amazed that people are just willing to go on good faith or what they're told by salespeople. To me, you're just rolling the dice. So be smart, ask questions, dig hard, make sure you understand everything, ask all your questions. Once you sign, that's the line in the sand. And I don't care how much some franchisor says we're partners. You don't know that same person's going to be around tomorrow because they all have the right to sell their business. So, and you are signing the contract of unknowns in terms of they want to ship the business and start selling dog food. You got to start selling dog food. So you cannot have enough assurance that, that you've done and asked all the questions and that you have a commitment to see it through. Don't be lazy.
Well, John, it was a pleasure to have you on. We'll be sure to include your contact information, a link to your website for anyone that's looking to invest in a franchise, even look at an investor visa for those folks outside the U.S. John Usher also does handle immigration law. But John, it was a really pleasure to have you on, and I learned a lot from today's conversation, and I'm sure those listeners and those watching on YouTube will have learned a lot as well.
Well, I hope so, Patrick. I think it's important. I always enjoy talking to you because I know your heart's kind of where my heart is, and these issues are important to me, and they're important to you, and we're both intrigued by the business. So anytime, happy to talk to you.
Really appreciate it, John.